By way of introduction, I've worked in change management and facilitation in the broader public sector for about 25 years now. And about halfway through all that, I came out and interestingly, my focus on the world changed somewhat. And since I worked the majority of my time in the health sector, I started seeing the stigma, the ignorance and indifference to health, particularly mental health, that those in the LGBTQ plus, sorry, I have trouble with that, community face on a regular basis. I believe one of the ways that we can make a difference in any respect is to shine a light on the problem so that issues can be seen and more people can help to address the problem. And I think that's what we're going to do today. And I'm very pleased to be here. And thank Ray for inviting me. And I'm going to ask each of each of the panelists to say a little bit about themselves, and we'll get into the questions. So Ray is sitting in as one of the panelists for today, and then we have Kathleen,
yep,
and Constantine, and David. So they're each going to take a moment to introduce themselves to you, and then we're going to start with the questions. We have an hour for the whole event. At about the 40-minute mark, I'm going to pause and see where we are and see how many of you have questions. If you don't have questions, we'll keep going on with mine. If you do have questions, we may stop and ask yours. Let's see, just so we get sure everyone gets addressed. That sound fair? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to, Ray, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ray, and I'm an intern at the Healthy Minds Canada. I'm also a student and social service worker. I'm also a survivor of mental health, being a refugee here in Canada. And it's very important, mental health is very important for me. So that is why I educate myself more and be more aware so I can be an activist and advocate for change. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathleen. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I work for Egale Canada Human Rights Trust. Long name, we'll just shorten it to Egale. So Egale is a national LGBTQI2S organization, and at Egale, I'm the Director of Research and Policy. So we do a lot of, in my department anyway, in the policy department, we talk about bills and legislation and different research that's happening, and we're really heavily involved in the bill that passed last week, which I'm super excited about because it's been a long time in the making. And personally, so I'm a queer woman, and I also have struggled with mental illness both historically and currently, so I speak from both lived experience and professional experience.
Hi everyone, my name is Constantine. I'm a social worker, registered social worker, and I work for the AIDS Committee of Toronto. I've been there for 5 years, and I'm one of 5 counselors, 2 of which counsel people who are infected or affected by HIV, and 3 of us work with specifically the gay, queer, trans men. Sometimes we have to label everything, but basically it's gay men. We do counseling in the bathhouses, but we also have clients at the office coming in. It's free service, and yeah, and I think that's about it. Yeah.
Good morning, I'm David D.K. Sumari. I am a newcomer to Canada. I've been here like 9 months, I think, if it's longer. I'm an openly person living with HIV, identify as queer. I am currently the interim MSMP educator at Black Cap, but I also volunteer with ASAP and with CAT. So I've been trying to, get more involved in the work here. Personally, I've had mental health challenges, not just back from my home country and negotiating my sexuality and my HIV status, but as well as settling here. And we don't often consider how migration affects our mental health as well. And so, yeah, I'm going to speak from my own lived experience. Thanks.
Thank you. So just to give you a sense of how we're going to do this, we're going to start with a quick check from the panel members on what they see as service program and logistics issues in mental health provision. Then we're going to move on to some questions about how society is helping or hurting mental health in the community. Then we're moving to government's role. And then we're going to finally end with actions that the community can take to help with any impacts of mental health. Barring, if we get through all of that, your questions, we should be good. So I'll start with the first question panel. I'd like to ask you each to if you could give your take on mental health challenges facing the LGBTQ plus community, and if you could maybe describe the biggest mental health challenges that you see with your work. Right. Well, I don't know if you want to answer that or not. And by the way, panel members can choose not to answer if they don't feel they have any direct experience, or they may all answer. It depends entirely on how they feel.
Okay, so based on lived experience and growing within the LGBT community, I think that the main problem in the community is how we see ourselves. I think it's how we think, feel, and respond to certain situations. And there's a lot of internalized discrimination within the community, and it kind of stops people from reaching out to seek help. So I think that we need to make some changes in our inner world before we can attack the outer world. The outer world will always have that impact on us, and it would be harder then for us to make a change from within. We have to do it together instead of individually. Yeah.
I think from my both personal and professional experience, I think the biggest thing is not so much the specific mental health challenge, it's more how it impacts specific communities. Because when we think of, oftentimes people see the rainbow and they say, well, LGBTQ, and it just kind of is lumped together and it's this one thing, and that's just not the case. There's so many different parts of that acronym, and there's different communities, and those communities are impacted very, very differently. So for me, I really focus on trans and gender diverse folks, specifically youth, intersex youth, which are often left out of the acronym for a lot of reasons, but I think it's really important to, for this kind of conversation, include them there. To spirit folks, so they're impacted in different ways because of their marginalization within the community, their marginalization within the larger society as a whole due to intersectionality. I mean, there's all these different components, and I think it's hard to pinpoint one issue. It's more about talking about how are different folks impacted differently within the community itself, and unfortunately there's a wide range of that, and it's something within the community we struggle with. We're still trying to get better at recognizing that intersectionality, being able to recognize issues like marginalized stress and how do we address that. So I think it's a really complicated answer, but I really would focus on the individual groups versus sort of the larger group as a whole.
And I agree with both of you. And the one thing that's coming up is marginalization. For me, as a service provider, access is the main issue. A lot of people who identify as queer or part of the rainbow, as Kathleen had said, they're at various stages of coming out, whether you're in the spectrum of the trans community or sexuality. Sometimes they don't know where to go, right? So at the AIDS Committee of Toronto, even though our focus is on HIV/AIDS prevention, and we provide counseling, we try to open the door so that we address mental health issues, and those who identify as trans, that they can come into our services without feeling that they need to have an HIV diagnosis. So I used to volunteer at the 519 as well, and I have counseled refugees who are coming in at various stages of transition and also questioning their sexuality. So if the agency is not accessible, whether in their advertising or just when they see them on TV and they don't see the words queer or LGBTQ+, then they tend not to go there. So we try to be as inclusive as possible in our agency and make the services as accessible. So that for me as a service provider is access. And maybe we'll talk about this more as we find the services that cater to our community.
Well, I was just having this discussion this morning with my partner about religion and how religion impacts on our mental health, particularly from some of us who come from very homophobic countries where religion is a primary driver of homophobia. In my particular instance, my father also is a Pentecostal pastor, and we have the same name. And so it's very ironic that on one hand, he is an evangelical minister, and on the other hand, you have this gay rights HIV activist son. And there's always this disconnect that I feel between him and I in that relationship, because he can't say the words, I love you. And if he says, I love you, I feel that I love you comes with a condition. And that impacts on my mental health, because I feel that sense of distance with my father. And so that's one side that I look at it at. I also look at sometimes when we talk about mental health, we put everybody under the LGBTQ umbrella, but it affects different communities differently. So particularly racialized trans folks are impacted by, I'm not just identifying as trans, I'm now a trans person of color. And how does that impact upon me? And where do I go for services to support myself? And those are the kinds of things I think we need to look at.
So I'm going to start with the next question with, good, David, we're going to go back, and then I'm just going to bounce around to make sure you all get a chance to say something first. So David, you could start. Are there any challenges, system issues, or bureaucratic problems that you think could be relatively easy fixed with some coordinated interagency effort? Well, lived experience even. I mean, giving an example, people who go to hospitals usually are driven nuts by the fact that they have to fill out an intake form for every single thing along the road. Is there any impediments that you've seen along those lines?
So for me, I think part of this systemic thing was coming here, and I actually am very grateful that I got connected to community when I got here. When I came here, my intention was not to stay. I came here as an activist to speak about my work back home. And I decided to stay while I was here. And part of it was the systemic stuff comes up. How do I get connected to community? How do I get access to medication? How do I get access to health services? I came in fall, and I experienced my first winter. I moved locations at least 6 times before I got a place of my own. And it impacted upon me because I remember going home one day and thinking to myself, I left my nice apartment back home in a Caribbean country where I've never experienced snow before. I'm cold and I'm alone. I'm staying by somebody's house who I don't know because I rented a room from them, and it's Christmas. And for me, I felt that it suddenly hit me that I was here and that I did not know what to do with myself. And so those are some of the systemic things I think we need to look at. How do we offer the right kind of support to people who come in as refugees and to claimants to make sure they're always connected to community, they're connected to spaces that can support them, and they have that kind of peer support. I've met other persons who identify as also PHA and MSMs, and queer, who are from homophobic countries. And it's because of a meeting that I was at, they were able to connect with me and to realize, okay, there's someone of my association that I can connect to and get support. Because even within the queer communities, always a stigma around POS communities as well too. So it's not easy to come out as a queer and POS person and a queer POS person who is a person of color.
So don't ever doubt that you can't answer a question if it's posed to you, because you do really well. Constantine?
Yeah, I understand what David's saying. So people who identify as refugees and they come here, they're going through a lot of stress, right? They're still in the coming out process, and they're here on their own. And they're still struggling with their identities. So to come to a place that's LGBTQ identified, that's so hard for them. And so it takes a while for them to actually access the services until they meet someone, at a coffee shop and say, hey, I'm a refugee as well. I heard about this place, go see them if you need to talk to someone. There's a lot of mistrust when they first arrive. They can't tell their story right away. And then having to tell their story again and again and again, it's re-traumatizing. So they need a safe space. And I'm not plugging my agency, but at the AIDS Committee of Toronto, the fact that it has AIDS on there, it's very hard for them to come access the services that are available, and you don't have to be HIV identified or a PHA, as David had said, because we offer counseling and other services that are complementary to the queer community. So it may take them a year before they even access the service, right? So places like Black Cap or ASAP or Egale, or the 519, all these queer identified services work in tandem and in collaboration so that we move the people that need the services. And from my perspective, again, as a service provider, it is access. And for me, it's difficult when they come and sit and tell me their stories and I find out that they've been waiting 1 or 2 years before they even had a chance to talk to somebody about their mental health issues. So for me, it's the coordination, I don't know the words I'm looking for now.
Integration, maybe?
Huh?
Integration.
Integration, yeah. And there's something missing in the way we talk to each other as service providers and as a community. And that's the frustration I feel, because it's here, the services, but trying to move the people to the services, there's a big gap somewhere, and I don't know what that is yet, or is.
I'll build off that. So
Yeah,
I think
thank you.
where, again, I come from a policy world, so I think that what you're both speaking to, and I'll come again from that lens, is the systemic barriers that are in place. So to give some examples of what that looks like, being in policy, we get to know about new strategies that are coming down the line. So one of the recent ones that just came out federally has to do with gender-based violence. So of course, that's very important, and we want to know how is that funding going to be allocated. And one of the biggest things that we see is that there's never explicit mention of LGBTQ folks, and even more specifically, the intersectionality that is within it. So what happens then is that there's all this funding, but it doesn't go to the people who are disproportionately impacted, the people who need it the most. So then what we see is the systemic barriers where agencies are just struggling to survive. They're working over capacity with limited resources, so there isn't the ability to do that crosstalk to say, what are you doing? How are you doing it? How do we work better together? And then on top of that, we think about just policies that are impacting people's ability to even, I'll say, have the spoons to focus on things like mental health. So an example would be birth certificate and IDs. So oftentimes thing that we hear is, for trans folks who say, I want to change my license because my license doesn't match my gender. I need that to be updated. So what happens is they have to go change their birth certificate. That costs money. So for someone who's already struggling, that's a big expense. You also have to show up at a place and talk to someone, and hopefully you'll get someone who knows what they're talking about, but that's not always the case. That's a difficult thing to do. So if you don't go through that process, you have an ID that potentially doesn't match your gender expression. And oftentimes what we hear is the most mundane things can have the biggest impact. So oftentimes people say they're going to buy cigarettes and they need to show their ID, and someone looks at them and says, your gender says male, but you look female. This is obviously fake. That is a really difficult thing to have to deal with. So to have to do that and just survive basic things every single day, which we know are hard, and then on top of that say, well, now I need to access services and deal with my mental health, and these services are just scrambling and trying to do the best they can, it's a lot. It's a lot for everybody involved. So I really look at the systems at place. How is it that we're supposed to be living in a country that's unfortunately seen as a beacon of LGBTQ rights, and yet we're doing a terrible job of supporting people every single day. So I think we need to focus on both what's happening on the ground and then the larger things and how those larger things are failing the people who need it the most.
So just before I just want to ask you two in the middle there. There's a program called the Health Equity Impact Assessment that's done by the Ministry of Health. I don't know, have you guys ever even seen that form or documentation? Because it sounds like a lot of this stuff could be addressed if you could actually identify to the funders what's going on.
I haven't.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, not me either.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's something we can share later. Okay, go ahead, Ray.
As a person who lived that experience, I think that all depends on which agency you go to. Some of these agencies, they are not socially intelligent, they are not emotionally intelligent, they are not culturally intelligent, some of the workers there. Sometimes, I've been to an organization and I wanted help, and I was put back, and I was put back, and put back, and put back. I made a decision to go to a different organization to get the help, and I was given the help right on. So sometimes, and I had many situations like disclosure with one agency that disclosed information, private information about me, and that affected and my health, and that affected me big time, especially as a newcomer here. And I don't know what people are going to go around and say. I know at one point of time, I nearly lose it because every time I saw someone, especially a Black gay person, I thought, well, this person was saying these things. I could actually hear the words, but they weren't saying anything because I allowed it to get to me and my mental health. And it's these same support systems that we go to for help that creates a mental problem for us. So who fits the issues within these agencies? Because it keeps going and going and going and going. So I think that the people that work within the agencies, they need to be addressed and the way how they deal with certain issues, right? Because everyone can't think for themselves. I was taught to think for myself. So, but there are some people that cannot necessarily think for themselves. They depend on people to give them that push. And if you're getting that push with limitations, but then, with limited help or bad intentions behind it, well, what can you do?
Thanks, Sherry. So question 3, and I'm going to start with you, Kathleen. Is substance abuse a bigger problem for the LGBTQ plus community when compared to the rest of Ontario? You may or may not, you're the policy person, so I picked you for that. Why would this be the case, and what resources are available for both prevention and recovery?
So research says yes, that LGBTQI2S communities are disproportionately higher, have higher rates of experiencing substance abuse issues. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. So, one, I'll go back to the issue of minority stress. And oftentimes that's labeled in different ways. And if that is labeled for you differently, that's totally okay. And really what that really speaks to is, if we imagine that all people in the world start with a certain level of stressors in their life, and then when you start adding on marginalized identities on top of that, the everyday stressors build and build and build. So you can imagine, as an example, a Two-Spirit youth. So for folks that don't know, Two-Spirit stems from Indigenous culture, right? So you have an Indigenous youth who also may identify, let's say, as gender fluid, potentially as also queer on top of that. So you have all these added layers that you've just added on top of that, the things that they have to deal with every single day. So, of course, when you're dealing with all these added stressors, you have to live, you have to function, and oftentimes that's where substance abuse can come into play. It's unfortunately it's a really chronic problem that we see. It's how do I just function? This might be one way to do that. So we also see the added stressors of the rates of homelessness. So LGBTQI2S folks, specifically trans, gender diverse, Two-Spirit, racialized, and LGBTQI2S folks with disabilities have higher rates of homelessness. So you add that level of stress, and so all these different things added and added and added increase the likelihood that someone, unfortunately, is going to develop an addictions issue.
That's a pretty precise question, so I won't ask all of you to answer if you don't want to, but if anyone wants to volunteer an additional response.
Yeah, from my perspective, it is prevalent, at least in the gay, bi, queer, trans community, because these are the people that I see in the bathhouses for sure, and this is a way to numb, as Kathleen had said, with the multiple stressors that they're facing. In the bathhouses, not only are they struggling with their sexual identity, but they're struggling with the multiple stressors, and it's a way to soothe themselves. They need to connect with other men who understand them, and then so they may have different lives outside of the bathhouses, right? They may identify as straight. They have family, they have children, but in the bathhouse, it's just connecting with other men sexually. Sometimes it's just talking to other men. It's a place of safety and comfort. But then on top of that, there are other men that may engage in drug use. again, as a way of coping. So all of that combined, the isolation and marginalization, easy access to substances, where else are you supposed to go, right? You go outside of the bathhouse, you're supposed to be a macho person, and then you have to take care of your family, and then you're inside, you're being marginalized because of your age, because of your appearance, because of your race, ethnicity, again, multiple stressors. So how am I going to escape? Oh, there's crystal meth there. It's free, I'll take it, right? You want to have sex with me? Why don't you have a shot of this with me? Because you want this? I'm being like very colloquial here, but that's the language, right? It's just a trade. It's you want some of this, and you're gonna have to do something for me, or I'm gonna have to do something for you, right? I'm in the ground level of what's happening with our queer community, at least in the bathhouse perspective. But when they come to the office and I provide counseling there, it's a very structured format, and I still hear the same stories, but we address the mental health, and that's where we come up with the strategies and try to refer them to treatment if they need treatment for addictions issues and further mental health services, right? So as we're talking, I'm seeing it working, but when you're in the ground, it feels like there's such a great divide because they come back. They come back and they talk to me again, and it happens in addictions world where they relapse. So I think that's my frustration coming out, that I feel that there's such a gap. And maybe Kathleen will talk about this again with the policy, that somewhere along the line that the funding structure is broken, that it's either 1 year or 6 months, and it's not sustainable because it's a Band-Aid solution, and then we put them out in the street, and then they re-engage in the activity that we tried to help them with.
Did anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can add to that. So one of the biggest struggles with accessing long-term funding, because I think you really hit that there, is that there's pockets, right? So there's maybe $5,000 here, there's $10,000 there, and that's all well and good, but if it's not long-term sustainable, how do you make sure that programs live? So oftentimes funders will say, you need to prove to me how many people you'll access, which would be great if we had numbers, but we don't have the numbers. And the reasons we don't have it is because Statistics Canada, as an example, doesn't collect information related to gender identity. So right away, I have absolutely no idea how many trans folks actually exist in Canada. I can guess anecdotally, there are best suggestions, but I don't have that info. So how am I supposed to prove to a funder how many people I might access if I don't even know the bare bones information of how many people actually exist? And then further down the line, when we talk about collecting health data, oftentimes, I often see this within different health centers, they're not collecting what we'd call disaggregated data, or information that really tells us about identities of folks, to say, for example, how many LGBTQI2S folks with disabilities am I seeing? Because if I need to target a program for them and I need the funding, I need to prove how many people I'm going to access, and they're not collecting it. So it makes accessing stuff on our end very difficult because they want proof and we can't give it because they're not setting that up for us.
Good, okay. Constantine, we're going to start with you for this next question. One of the hardest moments for a LGBTQ plus person can be coming out to parents and family. In your view, has parental acceptance improved? Is anyone able to help teenagers prepare for that conversation? And are there any resources available to kids whose parents didn't respond well to the news?
Small question.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I would say, from what I've seen, things have improved, but they haven't, if that makes sense. Because every year, when people are still struggling with their sexuality, whether they're in a marriage that they don't want to be in at a later stage in their life, or they've just come out to their parents and their culture forbids it. It's still a flat line for me. I can't really say that it's improved or has gotten worse. That maybe access to services or education is there, but the stigma still exists, the prejudice still exists. I have seen a slight change in acceptance, right? But the discrimination is still pervasive in pockets of communities, especially communities that are strongly rooted in, as David has said, religion and cultural identity, right? Because to be gay means to be different and to bring shame to the family. So I'm still seeing it, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Could anyone else you comment on that?
I think coming out is a process. We seem to think that coming out is a lifetime event. You come out once and that's it. I feel like I'm always coming out. You know, I came to Canada and I'm coming out again.
That's right.
Because you evolve and you embrace different identities and different sides of yourself. From my own experience, I do not. But what drew me, what made me feel comfortable to want to stay here, was the fact that I realized that I did not have to modify my behavior. So homophobia, as you know it, is oftentimes you see it as this very violent thing. People get attacked, people get killed, people get stabbed. But in very nuanced ways, it affects our lives. And it affected my life. So I modified how I dressed, how I spoke, where I went, who I spoke to, who I hanged out with. And I would be gay in certain spaces and not gay in other spaces. Because only when I came here, I realized that did not matter. And that made me feel comfortable now in wanting to stay here. Of course, I came to a very quick realization that there is a life beyond Church Street. So my partner and I'm going to give an example. She is trans feminine, and she and I went to Kensington Market on Saturday, and a guy made a comment about her that was transphobic and homophobic. And this is right here in Toronto, and of course she reacted to it. So it's to show that it still happens. And so while we tend to think that homophobia and transphobia does not exist, it still does exist. And that's part of the challenge. I don't know how yet to, because I'm trying to figure out, because I was asking her, so my mother wants to see you, because my mother accepts me for who I am. So I told my mother I'm with her, because of course my partner identifies as feminine, so with her. So my mother says, well, I want to see her next time we video chat. I said, okay. But I didn't even know how to begin to have the conversation to say to my mother, whether she is actually trans, and just a trans woman, because they don't know these concepts in their mind. So my mother wants to know, my mother is probably thinking, okay, he probably is dating a girl now. He's probably gone back. He's probably gone to being straight. So it's to have these kind of weird conversations for me to figure that out now. My father is a lost cause. I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to go there because it's always going to be the doomsday religion thing. The end of the world is coming. You need to be prepared for it. All the signs are there. I got a long lecture on Sunday when I called him for Father's Day about the end of the world is coming. Everything's all set. The Lord is coming soon. The times are getting shorter. Be prepared. Give back your life to the Lord. Blah, 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 blah. And so I'm like, okay. So I'm not even going to go there. Yeah?
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think one thing I would add in is just how important parental acceptance is. So there was an Ontario study called Transpulse. They actually have done a number of studies, and they showed that for trans youth who were accepted by family, rates of suicide dropped by 75%. That's how drastic it is, and it's so, so crucial specifically for trans, gender diverse, intersex, and two-spirit youth to have even one parent. They don't necessarily have to understand the minute it's said. Yeah. It's about learning. It's about doing the work that's needed in order to just better understand what they're experiencing, the types of things that they can do to support them. One of the biggest things that we often hear about is the school system and how difficult schools can be, not so much from the students, but just the structure, parents, teachers, that whole thing. It's complicated and there's a lot to it. And for parents to just take a few minutes to understand, learn, ask questions makes all the difference.
All right, I'm going to skip a couple questions because we are falling, well, we're not falling behind, we're doing just fine, but we have more questions than we have time. So, Ray, we're going to start with you on this one. Refugee status requires that those seeking asylum disclose the reasons for why they fled their country of origin. How traumatic is the disclosure of sexual orientation to refugee claimants? Are there alternatives for refugees to demonstrate their qualifications other than that? And resources available to ease or alleviate trauma or any PTSD effects?
Well, I filed at the airport, and to me that's the toughest process, because once you file there, you have to know everything. We get interviewed 3 times. So you have to say basically the same thing all the time. They ask the same question in different ways. It was traumatizing for me, especially having to disclose some really rough things, especially the relationship with my family and the relationship with religion. Being a singer in the church, and all of my privileges were taken away because I identified as a gay person. I never told them that I was, but someone said, and it just took one word, one conversation to just get me moved from everything. And growing up in a Christian family, so I had to disclose these things. As I said, it was very traumatizing. Coming out, I'm still in the process of coming out. It's like my family knows about, I feel my family knows about me, but I'm still in the process of doing that. So coming out here, so when I'm on the plane and I'm coming and I know I have to disclose my story, we have other things to think about too. How am I going to fit into the society? How am I going to come out and be this gay person? What is there waiting for me? Because we hear all good stories, oh, Canada is gay world and everything. So when I came in at the airport, I had so much other things. Different to disclosure, I had so much other things that were on my mind. And I just pray to God, it's like, just let me say the right things. It was all easy for me to get through the airport. And then even in the hearing, my information that I provided was so much that the guy just wanted to know, okay, just tell me about the police and my relationship with the police, and that was it. So I find at the airport it was most traumatizing for me, more so than in the actual court case, because he just wanted to get straight to the point, because he can clearly see I'm a gay person. That's what he told me. So I mean, I didn't have a real issue with mental health in regards to coming through the refugee system.
Kathleen?
I'll pass.
So let me take it, I guess, as the next refugee on the panel. Writing my story was perhaps it was traumatic, because you have to really dig. And there were parts to my life that I had kind of subconsciously buried. And it's in writing the story that I had to revisit some of those memories that I had put in the back of my mind, never to return to. In fact, I had forgotten about them. It's really weird. It's weird. And then, so writing it was for me very, it's also, I saw it as a therapeutic opportunity as well, because I had the support to talk to people, to talk to someone to help me through that process. And so for me, while it was traumatic, it was also my therapy. But for a lot of persons who come in, they don't have that kind of support. They are told, write your story and get evidence. So you have to find evidence to prove your sexuality. And so they're scrambling to find Facebook conversations, WhatsApp conversations, pictures with their boyfriends or their lovers or the other halves to prove that they are, to prove their sexuality. And that's another thing we don't talk about. How it's not that easy to find the evidence or the data that people need. And so that adds another level of trauma. I remember, again, I said it was my first winter, and having to go to file in Kipling, which is like in the end. And I knew I had to be up like 5 o'clock in the morning to be one of the first people there. And it was a very cold morning, and I'm there struggling with all of these layers of clothes. I hated it. And to take the subway to get to Kipling Station and walking to the center, and the wind is blowing me, and I'm done small already, so I'm blowing one way and the wind is the other way, and it's me against the wind. And I just felt like it felt very overwhelming. And intensely overwhelming too. But I'm here now. I'm much more, I think I'm much more settled. Mm-hmm. But I also am concerned about those who are not, I do consider myself fortunate because I had access to community when I got here. A lot of other folks don't. So I think about what they have to go through.
Thank you. So I'm going to do one more question. We're going to see a show of hands to see if anyone else has any questions before we wrap up. So if Premier Wynne and Prime Minister Trudeau were here with us today, and I don't think they are, what grade would you give the provincial and federal governments for improving access to mental health and community supports for the LGBTQ plus community? And if the provincial and federal governments could make one change to benefit the mental health of the community, what would it be? Kathleen?
It's my favorite question. We were chatting about this before. I'd give them a C. I'll start with the federal government. So I'm not sure if a lot of people know, but Justin Trudeau announced a special advisor on LGBTQ2 is the acronym they use, issues. In the federal budget, they were given $3.6 million a year, $3.6 million for 3 years. And that's incredibly frustrating. First of all, we don't know what the mandate is. What does it mean? You have this human, and the human is supposed to specialize in these issues. And so that's a lot of different people. Those are different communities. We're talking 10 million issues at the exact same time, but there's no specific mandate on what that's gonna look like. What do you do with $1.2 million a year? Like, how do you address the extreme levels of homelessness, poverty, violence with $1.2 million a year? And then, like I was speaking to, the lack of explicit, so actually writing down and saying, in this strategy, this is how these communities who are disproportionately impacted will benefit from this thing, and that doesn't happen. So it's incredibly frustrating when there's almost a show to say, here's what we're doing, and we have this person, and we're gonna do all these things, but then not actually see the action. The biggest hope we have is with Bill C-16, which passed last week, which is huge. We've been working for years on this. It adds gender identity and gender expression to the Canadian Human Rights Code and the Criminal Code, which finally, for the first time, makes transphobia illegal nationally. We didn't have that before. A lot of people don't realize that. They just assumed it was a thing. It didn't exist. So that's great, but what's gonna happen now? How are we implementing that? Because it's one thing to have something written on paper, it's another thing to how that's actually gonna look every single day. So I think it's frustrating. It almost seems like we're placating an issue that needs action, and it needs meaningful engagement from the communities who are most impacted, and that's not happening.
Constantine, sorry, Constantine.
Kathleen had said it. As far as engagement, again, because I'm on the front lines, and Kathleen said this before, like, we're in it, but at the end of the day, we're kind of tired, so it's hard to be engaged and also ask service users and clients to get more engaged because they have to live their lives, right? So, and this is what I'm frustrated with, because Trudeau will raise the flag And the politicians will attend the flag-raising ceremonies, and then that's it. Or they'll attend the pride parades, right? And I'm thankful for this bill going through. And I gave the government C+, just the plus for an effort, because this is encouraging, right? We have to give them some slack because they have multiple issues to address. But the fact that they're highlighting the issues on a federal level, provincial, and municipal level, that is there. So I like that. But it's the coordination piece. It's so hard. So.
As a PHA, one of my current concerns has been the work around decriminalization on non-disclosure. Mm-hmm. That's been a talk, and it seems to be, that's it, just a bunch of talk.
That's right.
And there is no move to action. So on World AIDS Day, somebody makes a statement, oh, we need to decriminalize non-disclosure, people living with HIV, and 6 months later, it's still happening. Yeah. And it happens, disproportionately affects persons of color. Mm-hmm. And that's a very weird dynamic for me now, because I left a country where I was a criminal for my sexuality, and I was not prosecuted for my HIV status. Now I'm in Canada, where I'm free to be who I want to be, but then on the other hand, I'm criminalized for not disclosing my HIV status to my partner. And so, what is it? And actually there was a symposium last week about that same law symposium thing, about challenging the law. And I don't understand why in the year 2017 to change a law that makes absolutely no sense, mm-hmm. that stigmatizes groups of people, and that has perpetuated its own sense of violence. My understanding the law is created to prevent gender-based violence, but in fact continues to perpetuate gender-based violence against women, more so black women or persons of color women. That for me, I can't give them a grade. I would say C, perhaps. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're right on schedule. It is 1:45, which is the period we left for questions from the audience. So can I have a quick show of hands, anyone who does have a question for the panel? One. Okay, two, okay. All right, so we'll start with you, sir. So if you just wait. Oh, yep.
Well, good afternoon to each and everyone, the panel and the audience at hand. Name is Richard, or community outreach worker, and also a minister of the gospel. As a community worker, I've been acquainted with the Human Rights Procedure Act and whatnot. As a minister of the gospel, have been basically, it's inclusive directives and whatnot. And so it is that we have a dual spirituality or personality or character through myself. In essence, I do believe that one has the right to self-expression in whatever way that he or she finds or understands that. And when it comes to inclusive societies like churches and different societies, a certain directive is expected to follow. My friend Ray mentioned of the fact that he was expelled, or what's the word they use? Expelled from activities within the church that he had was attended. And we have which we had a discussion the other night, and we're talking about lifestyles, right? So we have different lifestyles that become culturally accepted. And in some church, or most churches, polygamy and other type of sexual activity outside of marriage is not condoned, which is also a lifestyle. And on the other hand, a person has a right to his activity while once it doesn't endangers other persons within the environment. So then, and I didn't get this young man's name, David. David mentioned about being prosecuted for his self-expression and sexuality of choice, or some would say innate. Again, also in the church environment, you have a lot of persons who are struggling with their identity, whether it's if they have made the right choice or they have been pressured into that kind of society, or Christian society or Islamic society, or you name it. And due to that fact, the person undergo a number of different type of mental disorder. And the tragic thing is that suicide is what they resort to, which is due to the fact, again, we have an intolerant community.
Richard, these are all really valuable points, but there are other people who have questions. Do you have a question for the panel?
The question is, how can we accept persons' choice of self-expression, or what some will say innate what's the other action word I'm looking for? An innate behavior through what some might say God-given, or through DNA transferal or whatnot. How do we deal with that in an effective way without, as we are in, what do you call it, Pride Month? As you know, the LGBT community has been coming through a traumatic experience, and at times they transfer their intolerance on other communities. How do we effectively manage that?
Okay, I want to take a jab at that. Okay, so I think that it all depends on where you come from. My experience as a Barbadian will not be the same experience as a Trinidadian, because we come from two different places, two different cultures, right? I think that the relationship between you and your family is key to how you see yourself or how you fit into society. And if you don't have a key relationship with your family then, and you come to these services, or you come to this country looking for a relationship or to build a family, and you keep getting shut down all the time, it's hard for you. So it does come with challenges, but it all depends on where you were rooted from. I had a good relationship with my family, but they did not accept my lifestyle, not until I come to Canada. Me and my mom, she was here and I was here. That's the relationship. When I came to Canada and she realized, you know what, I miss my son. And she came and she saw me after 2 years of being here. She never asked me anything about my lifestyle because she automatically knew. I took her to Carabana. She saw all the gay people partying with all of the straight people. And she came to that point when she realized that, you know what, the life here in Canada is different to the life in Barbados. Maybe she needs to take a step back and allow me to be who I want to be, right? So we have a stronger relationship now than we had before, but we did have a relationship. So it all depends on where you're coming from. In regards to David and his father, they're going through this issue with the fact that his father is a pastor, right? And he is an activist. How do we bond that together? So there are many barriers there, because his father is not going to change his beliefs, but he's still going to love his child regardless. But a simple I love you with meaning behind it can change David's whole, change the way that David sees life and how he fits into society. Sometimes when I hear I love you from my mom, it meant the world, especially coming here, because it was not something that she was that she accustomed telling me. But it means a lot to hear that, right? So every day I thank God for her. I let go of the past. We had our differences, but I'm happy that we're able to have a relationship that allows me to move forward with my life. So it depends on where you come from.
Can I respond? As a person who has been psychologically affected by the church, I was told that I was demon-possessed because I had the spirit of homosexuality and the spirit of AIDS in me. I'm very much, and I've seen how the church, in its own way, inflicts psychological wounds on people, on members of its congregation. I think the church needs to have a critical look at itself as a social institution. When I say the church, I mean not to speak to the church. There are other forms of religious space that people go to. They go to mosques, they go to temples. These institutions need to take a critical look at themselves and the ways that they continue to perpetuate the kinds of violence against persons of the LGBTQ community. They have to have a conversation about sexuality. By your utterance of the word choice, I already got offended. Because I didn't wake up one morning and decide to be gay. It was who I am. It is who I am. And it's who I've always known myself to be, even before I knew the word gay. Or I knew the word homosexuality. I just knew I was this way. And so that's the conversation the church needs to have with itself around human sexuality. To understand human sexuality, it has existed for centuries. It's been around before we even knew it. It's been around for years and years, even before there was a church. In ancient societies, human sexuality was expressed very differently than how it is now. And so I think, for me, that's how I see it. I hope I answered your question.
Anyone else? There was a question over, did you have a question?
Oh, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for sharing your stories.
You're welcome.
And that you're the opposite of a criminal. And I think, does this work right now? I think the key is sharing your stories. Like, you're sitting here smiling, sharing your stories while people, like you'd said, are taking years to tell their stories. People suck, unfortunately, and don't want to hear everybody's real stories. And I think everybody needs therapy, personally. So basically, I don't know how. I think psychotherapy is, like, I'm a psychotherapist. I 150% believe in psychotherapy. I think everyone should have it, especially in transitional times in our lives, no matter what we're going through. Mental health, finally we're talking about it, but yeah, how do we implement these things? So basically, I guess I wanted to ask, did you find, because did you get psychotherapy, and did you find that helped you get through things, or did you do it through peer support, through speaking? I want to know, does psychotherapy help if you've tried it? Or what has got you here right now? Because it's about acceptance, right? Accepting yourself, as you said, and we can't change other people. And I think the best way to do that is through therapy, personally.
I'm not sure if I received psychotherapy, but I know I've had counseling sessions, and because I know it's kind of different to who you talk to. So I've gotten that one-on-one counseling because I needed it, and that has helped me. I'm trying to remember the other part of your question.
I guess I always wonder how you have all these stressors, how you are told that you're a criminal because of your sexuality, and then get to this point where you're able to talk. Everyone's walking around with secrets, and that's what's making them mentally ill. And you're sitting here right now talking, inspiring people, inspiring me. What was the biggest, what's the word? Like, what do you think moved you forward? Like, what what was the main contributor to you moving forward like this?
I think it's acknowledging that I have a sense of resilience, and for a lot of us, that's what helps us manage and thrive through life. Is embracing my own resilience. Even though I sit here, I know that I still have my negotiations to do. I know I'm still dealing with my own traumas. I'm still dealing with stuff. I'm not perfect, but I can do this now. And I'm on my own journey. But I embrace every day, I acknowledge the fact that I have a spirit of resilience that has seen me through previous stuff. I've managed an HIV diagnosis in a time when I thought everybody's going to die. So I managed seeing my friends die from AIDS complications back home. And I'm here 20 plus years later in a strange country talking. I never thought I would see that day.
It's amazing.
And that's amazing in itself. So I think back to my own journey and on how far I have come, and that has given me the strength to continue to move forward. And that, I think, is the key.
Can I just, can I just quickly address, I agree with you that we need to talk about mental health. But as I said earlier, just like with coming out, it's a process, right? In some cultures, in some communities, mental health is still a stigma, especially if they're coming from racialized communities or if there's a religious context that you can't talk about these things because there's something wrong with you. So it is a process. Accessing counseling, whether it's free or paid, and from my perspective, there's not enough free or affordable psychotherapy or counseling services. And you need some kind of concurrent issue in order to access counseling in some cases. So for me, as a service provider, there's not enough of it. And my hope is that psychotherapists will be accessed easily rather than, how doctors can bill OHIP, but that's a wish list of mine, that mental health services should be accessible for everybody.
Actually, so we are, it is now 2 o'clock. So that's the end of our time. So I'm going to hand things over to Ray, but for my part, I want to thank Healthy Minds Canada for this event and allowing me to participate. And back to you.
Ray's just started to join the panel because we had someone who was unable to make it at the last second. So I'll just wrap things up really quickly. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, David. Thank you, Constantine. Thank you, Kathleen. And thanks, Ray. Ray organized this whole thing. And thank you